This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Yes, this is not our typical program. Normally we have just a panel discussion, but Isabel and Elisa from EMD are going to be sharing a presentation where we're having a discussion around the topic on how we can learn and get ahead of the grant cycle for 2025. So Isabel, welcome to the program. If you wouldn't mind just providing just a background on yourself and your connection.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Isabel. I've been with EM Designs for about 3 years, where I work with organizations applying for security grants that involves conducting threat, vulnerability, and risk assessments, as well as working with organizations in the grant spending process if they are awarded. Over the past several months, I've spent a lot of time understanding how the federal grants are scored. I've been talking with program reps from various states to understand how they look at grant applications. And so I'm excited to get to share some of that information with everybody today.
Awesome. And we're grateful that you're here and to share that information with us. So welcome, Isabel. Elisa Mueller, welcome back. You've been here many times before and always willing to share your wealth of knowledge and experience with our community. So Elisa, if you wouldn't mind just refreshing our community on your background and connection to the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So Elisa Mueller, I'm the founder of EMD. And while we do both traditional security design consulting, we do have this very specific niche in the grant space. I've been personally doing grants for about 15 years, getting contracted by different organizations. And sadly, this is such a needed focus in terms of, finding grant funding for our customers, particularly for schools. Obviously, that's why we're so grateful that ZeroNow is bringing attention to these grants and allowing us to share whatever knowledge we can with folks out there, whether or not they work with us. We try and help everybody. We try and give as much free information so people can help themselves. So we're grateful for you guys.
Awesome. And before, Elisa, before we move to the presentation, the feature of the meeting today, I just want to remind participants, if you have a question for Elisa or Isabel, hit the Q&A button. And we'll get to that soon after the presentation. So just hit the Q&A button, and you're welcome to hit chat in the regular web chat, if you will, sharing your background, where you're from. So Elisa, I'll turn over to you.
Sure. Can we share?
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so I'm going to share a little bit of the agenda if you want to, move to that slide. So today, and you may have seen me discuss a lot of the content that we're going to talk about today in previous ZeroNow webinars, but today we're going to focus primarily on the federal level grants, the ones that are most popular with our customers, particularly the SVPP, or the School Violence Prevention Program through the DOJ, also known as the COPS grant. And also the FEMA Nonprofit Security Grant Program. The FEMA program is by far the most popular. It's the one we've had the most success with. And Isabel's going to sort of give you some broad overviews on the differences between the two. We're going to give you a lot of information, as much as we possibly can in this short span of time. But we do also work on a number of other grants, a lot of state and local grants outside of this school space. But, obviously for today's purposes, those are the two that we're going to really focus on. But if anyone has questions on other grants, please reach out to us. Also, we want to give you some good information on what we found over the years, particularly in 2024 with the last grant cycle that we just worked on with a lot of our customers, on how to really make your application stand out, what to make sure you're including in there, and what you might want to leave out, just to sort of fine tune your narratives, your applications, your assessments that you're going to be submitting. And Isabel's going to go over that in detail with you. We also want to share some of the essential documentation that we work on for all of our customers. A lot of people don't necessarily know that there are more documents you can include in your application other than just the narratives or what's known as the investment justification, which also is basically just an application, and then also the threat assessment. There are other supporting documents that people can prepare to supplement that submittal package. So we're going to talk a lot about just overall essential documents and what's required and what you can add as additional options. And then we had our busiest year yet. In the short span of time, we've been really focusing on these grants. I would say the last 4 years, this program has just exploded for our team. And again, we already sort of came to the table working with a lot of customers and knowing a lot about grants, but even in just the last 12 years, we've gotten so much more applicants. We've worked in so many more states with more grants and more government representatives that are giving us a lot more feedback. So this past grant cycle, we've gotten a lot of great information. There's also been some changes, and we're going to talk to you a lot about what we found out in terms of changes that we're preparing our customers for 2025, and some things you might want to consider if you're preparing your own grants. We are going to have a Q&A session, but what I did also want to mention is there's so much information that Isabel's going to share, and it's way more than what we have time for. So we started as an organization preparing a course for anyone, for any school in particular, who might not necessarily have the money to have us do the large majority of the work for them. And we're testing out that course right now. So we wanted to, because we appreciate the ZeroNow community and we want to help as many people as possible, we're going to be giving away 3 seats to our course. And again, we're still sort of in the beta test mode, but we have some, again, great content. We're going to have a lot more time to deliver that content through the course. So if you're interested in being considered for the course, or you just want general information about any of the grants, we have a sign-up link. Mary, if you want to share that with everybody, that'd be great. You can go ahead and sign up, and we'll send you some additional information, or if you want to be considered for one of these free seats for our course, please indicate that. And we're going to be selecting 3 seats. We are going to prioritize ZeroNow members. That is, one of the things I wanted to mention. So if you aren't a ZeroNow member, you should absolutely join. Highly recommend it. I love ZeroNow. I love the community. I think that you guys are doing tremendous stuff. So you definitely want to become a member if you aren't already. We are going to have a Q&A. And so as we're moving on to the next slide, Mary, we do have a poll. If you want to, we want to know who's out there. Are you a manufacturer? Are you a school? Are you an integrator? Who are we talking to? Just so we can sort of tailor some of the information that we're delivering. While you guys are filling in that poll, I'm going to tell you briefly about EMD as an organization. Obviously, you can see our mission right there. But I'll tell you, when we first started, we worked with a lot of partners, well-known partners that are out there. And what we were seeing, particularly during COVID, was the need for this particular content, going after grants. And again, I had been working with grants for about 15 years. So I always knew there was a demand there, but I didn't realize how big of a demand there was. So over the last 4 years, we've really revamped our whole operation to focus as much attention on this need. And we've really, this is great. Okay, so we got a lot of K through 12, so that's fantastic. Wonderful. So over the last 4 years, we really sort of put a lot of time and effort into this grant program and developing it out so that it is a well-rounded program, not just teaching you how to win the money, but helping you win the money, doing a lot of the work for you, and then helping you spend it on the back end. For our manufacturing partners, and there's quite a few partnerships we've developed over the last 6 to 12 months. They also are recognizing the value of not just trying to sell their product, but supporting their customers supporting K through 12s. Some of which, I don't know if everybody out there knows this, I may have said this on a previous webinar, we have developed a giving program. So if we cannot get one of our applicants grant funding, we will lean on our partnerships to ask for donations. When it comes to school safety, keeping kids safe, we feel like that's worthy enough of going to beg to the rest of the community for some level of a donation. And it's worked out well. We've had such a huge response. So if you are one of our partners, one of our manufacturing partners or integrated partners that are on this call, thank you so much for everything that you've been doing in terms of supporting any schools or houses of worship that we've been working with over the last 12 months. And, particularly if you've donated product or services. The last thing I'll say is we have prepared a resources guide. Again, there's so much content and we're trying to condense it as best as we can to deliver in this webinar. But we know there's going to be, so much information that we're going to breeze over. So Isabel has prepared a resources guide for you. Mary, I think you're maybe sending it out.
It's a part of that same link where you can request to be considered for the course.
Perfect. Okay. So if you sign up through that link, we will make sure you get the resources guide as a follow-up to this presentation. All right. And with that, Isabel, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you, everybody, again for joining, and I'll stay on for any additional questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So, like Elisa mentioned, today's webinar, we're going to focus on the 3 most popular grants that we go after. The first is going to be the Nonprofit Security Grant. As the name suggests, it is for nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status. Now, this particular grant focuses and hands awards out to organizations that are deemed at high risk of a terrorist attack. A little bit later, I'll go over some strategies and ways that you can potentially demonstrate this. The second grant is going to be the BJA's Stop School Violence Prevention Program. There are 2 categories of eligible applicants. The first is going to be state governments. The second are going to be cities, townships, counties, nonprofits with or without 501c3 status, institutions of higher education, independent school districts, and private institutions of higher education. And then the COPS School Violence Prevention Program, or as we call it, the SVPP grant. This is going to be specifically for school districts, K through 12 schools, to increase security on school grounds. So what I'm going to do is go over some background on each of these grants and talk a little bit about what you can do with these grants, the type of projects that you can get funded. Starting with the Nonprofit Security Grant. The first thing I want to point out here is that the applications, you can request up to $150,000. You'll notice below, you'll see every single year historically, more funding has been allocated to this grant, meaning every single year, more and more organizations have been able to get awards through this program, which is amazing. One organization, they can actually apply up to 3 times, so for 3 physical addresses. So let's just say, for example, your Catholic church, and maybe adjacent, you also have a school and you have a parish center. And all 3 of those buildings have their own physical address. You would be able to apply for each of those buildings for, again, $150,000 each. Deadlines to keep in mind, the notice of funding is typically announced late winter, early spring, and then deadlines are going to be late spring, early summer. And then awards are typically announced between late August and November. It really depends on your state. All right, so this is not an exhaustive list of things that are allowable, but if you search for FEMA's authorized equipment list, you will be able to find it. Make sure you do the advanced search option for the NSGP grant. Otherwise, when you're looking on it, you'll see everything you could possibly apply for any FEMA grant out there. But these are some common projects that people pursue with the NSGP grant. So you've got entry locking mechanism or access control, intrusion alarms, lighting, communication technology like intercoms and PA systems, panic buttons, two-way radios, video surveillance. You can replace or install new doors and gates, install fencing, bollards. You can get training, security guards for your campus, as well as antivirus, anti-malware software, just to give you some ideas. So some states also have their own version of the NSGP grant. They're listed here below. This is as of 2023. So what this means is for nonprofits in these states, they are able to apply for the federal grant for the $150,000, as well as apply for their state's version of the NSGP grant for however much that they are giving out. The one exception to this, I will say, is Arizona. They don't let you apply for their state grant if you applied for the federal grant that same year. There's also New York has a hate crimes grant, as well as Maryland. These are nearly identical to the NSGP grant. They just call them something different. And Tennessee has a house of worship grant. This is for security guards for churches. So like Elisa mentioned, there are several state grants that are out there as well. All right, so for the STOP grant, I already went over the eligibility, but I want to talk about the award amounts. So if you fall under Category 1, you can request up to $2 million. If you're in Category 2, it's going to be $1 million. Examples of ways you can use the funding is to develop and operate technology solutions, develop and implement multidisciplinary behavioral threat assessment and/or intervention teams, train school personnel on preventing school violence, educate students on how to prevent school violence, provide training for law enforcement working in schools, and then hiring school support personnel to prevent school violence. So most common, the projects are going to be related to training and hiring security personnel. And the school violence prevention program. So this one has a more narrow applicant pool. It is specific to school districts. The maximum funding is going to be $500,000, and there is a 25% match. I'm going to go over this a little bit later. The deadline for this is typically in June, and then awards are then again announced typically between October and November. Here is allowable equipment through the SVPP grant. It's relatively similar to the NSGP grant. You can do, access control systems, lighting, panic buttons, video surveillance, and you can even do metal detectors with this grant. Other allowable costs include supplies. So let's just say as part of your grant, you're going to host trainings on your campus and you need to print out flyers or packets. You can get that cost reimbursed. Again, you can also apply for training, and if there is any travel associated with that, you can get that reimbursed. Now, with this grant, the training is specific for law enforcement officers to prevent school violence. So if you are a K-12 school and you have your own law enforcement department there, you could get training for them. And then you can also contract somebody to help manage the spending of this grant and get that cost reimbursed. All right, the award amount. So I want to give an example. So the first thing, if you're thinking about going after this grant, that I would recommend doing is first, obviously, determining what you want to apply for. And then go out and get some quotes so you can figure out what your total project cost is. That's the key first thing you want to do. So let's just say, you say we're going to apply for cameras and access control. You get your quotes, and you determine that our total project cost is going to be $500,000. What you would then do is 75% of that total project cost is going to be what your SVPP request is. So in this example, you have $375,000. Then 25% of that is going to be your match, so $125,000. The grant has a 3-year performance period, so you have 3 years to make up that match. Now, if your school district can demonstrate financial need, there is an option to try and defer the match, meaning, so for in this example, you could request $500,000, which would be your total project cost in this case. All right, so moving on to preparing your application, essential documents. I'm going to kind of be feeding in some different like tips just when thinking about getting these documents together. All right, so the first thing to think about, and I'm going to start with the nonprofit security grant. They are scoring your application based on potential risk for a terrorist attack. Some things that you can include in your application that score you points for this grant are going to be if you have a religious affiliation, if there's a large presence of children on site. And again, you can demonstrate or talk about this in the sense that you could be a potential target, or on the other hand, it is difficult to evacuate children. And so you need those preventative and mitigating efforts in place. Proximity to diverse religious areas. So is there a potential for like religious tensions in your nearby area? Now, this doesn't mean that something has to have actually happened, but again, you're showing the potential, the risk could be there. And then history of hate crimes or threats that your organization has experienced. You want to outline and document those. If you haven't had them directly, has anything happened in the nearby area that you can use to show that your organization is at an increased risk? And then visibility from the road. So do you sit on a highway or a busy intersection? Is your organization very easy to spot? And then a little bit more specific from that, are there visible, identifiable religious symbols? So are you on a busy roadway or that intersection and there's a large cross at the front of your building? So if somebody in the area wanted to go by and target religious organizations, you would stand out and that could potentially increase your risk. All right, so there are two required documents for the grant. There's the threat vulnerability and risk assessment and the investment justification. I know there's a lot of text on this slide. This is one of our resource guides. So if you put in your information, we'll make sure you have this. But what this slide really is going over is the type of content that you want to make sure that these documents include. I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the investment justification because that is the actual document that is scored. But the overall picture here is going to be that these two documents are going to complement each other. So the TVRA, it's going to be comprehensive. It's going to provide a narrative on the organization history. It's going to outline all of the security gaps and all potential recommendations. Now, when you're looking at that TVRA, you couldn't possibly, address all of those with the one grant that you're applying for. So in the investment justification, you're going to pick out a couple of or a few projects from the TVRA, and you're going to write about that in the investment justification. So that will be more specific to what you want to prioritize with the grant that you're going after. On the IJ, there are typically 10 spots to put requested items. But keep in mind, the grant funding is only for $150,000. If you have quite a bit of time before your deadline, it's not required to get quotes on your project before submitting, but I would encourage you, if you can, to do that, just because that will give you a really good idea of how much you're going to be able to accomplish with this grant. It also makes it easier for you to really demonstrate and outline your projects for the grant reviewer. Sometimes grant reviewers will look at investment justifications and they'll say, I didn't really understand what exactly they were trying to address. It was too vague. Now, you don't want to be so specific that you're calling out a specific product. But what you can do with your quotes is you can give them estimated quantities and where things are going to be located. Now, before I show you what an investment justification looks like, I do want to talk about some additional required documents. So another thing you need to make sure to include is going to be your organization's mission statement on your letterhead. And then for some states, they do allow you to upload police reports. So if you had a significant incident on your campus, you could put that with your application as well. And then you always want to make sure you check with your state administrative agent on any additional documents that your state is going to request. So the 3 documents that I mentioned today, that's the federal standard. Everybody needs to have those. But sometimes states will ask for additional documents like a worksheet or some kind of letter with proof of 501c3 status. So you want to check with that individual to make sure you have everything included. All right, so this is an example of a page from the investment justification. And I want to go over a few things about this document. So when you go to open it, either from an email that the state sends you or through the state website, you'll need to make sure that you download and open this document in Adobe. If you try to do it in like a PDF like preview page, you're going to get this like please wait error. You can use it with the free version of Adobe, so you don't have to pay for anything to open this document. And then the second important thing to note here is that when you go to submit your investment justification, the form cannot be considered altered. There's an easy way to check this. So let's say, you open up the document, you start filling out some of these questions, save it to your computer, close out the form, and then reopen it. If these answer boxes underneath the questions are blue, that means you're good. The document has not been altered. If they're white, the document has been altered in some form and you need to re-download it and resave it. A common thing that people will do that alters the form is instead of just doing a regular save, they'll export it as a PDF, and that will change from the answer boxes from blue to white. So just make sure you always check that before you submit. All right, so I want to go over a few ideas on how to answer a few of these questions. Part 1 of the IJ is just, legal name of the organization, address, and some identifying information. Part 2 is really where it gets into some of the actual content. So for example, the first question in part 2 reads, please describe this location's symbolic value as a highly recognized national or historic institution, landmark, that renders the site as a possible target of terrorism or other extremist attack. What grant reviewers are looking for in this question is, if somebody is driving by your building, how visible are you and what can they see that points out the type of organization that you are? So if it's a religious organization, again, are there signs, building signs by the road? Are there crosses in front or on top of the building that make it very apparent that this is a religious organization? Now, if you are more, let's say, tucked back, you're not very visible, there are some other ideas of ways you can address this question. You can talk about online presence. Do you have a large social media presence as another, possibility? Or again, how do you interact with the community? Are you very well known in your community? And tell them about that. The second question here is, please describe the organization's role in prevention, protection, response, and/or recovery, specifically highlighting the efforts that demonstrate integration of nonprofit preparedness with broader state and local preparedness efforts. For this question, things that they want to know about are, is your organization set up to serve as a shelter if there were to be a local disaster, or, a reunification site for a nearby school? If not, do you have the capacity and are you willing? Now, don't say that you're willing unless you really are, because they tell you you could potentially be called to do this. So just keep that in mind. And then 2, what are your partnerships with first responders? Do first responders come and do trainings on your facility? Do you have regular meetings with them to talk about the security in the area? As much as I love talking about the investment justification, we don't have time to go over the entire document, but Elisa talked about the course in the beginning. This is exactly what we're going to do in this course, is go question by question and give you different strategies on how you can answer these. So be sure, if you're interested in beta testing the course for us, that you let us know. All right, so that's the nonprofit security grant. I want to go ahead and move to the BJA stock grant. And this one has a 2-step application process. The first is going to be registering in grants.gov. Again, this information is going to be in our resource guide as well, so you can get this after the webinar. But what you'll do is you're going to follow the prompts and you're going to submit 2 forms. There's an SF-424 form and a lobbying form. Even if you don't have lobbying activity to disclose, you have to submit these forms. Once you do that, you're going to get instructions to then complete the full application in Just Grants. There, you're going to need a proposal abstract, a proposal narrative, and there's a web-based budget detailing how you're going to allocate the grant funding. Right now, this is all I'm going to say about the STOP grant. I'm going to move to the COPS registration process. They are nearly identical, so everything I'm about to say with the COPS grant is also going to be applicable to the STOP grant. So for the COPS, the first thing you're going to need to do is register in sam.gov and get your unique entity identifier number. The person that gets the sam.gov registration needs to be the person that does this step 2, which is registering in grants.gov. They're going to complete the authorized organization representative profiles, get a username and password, and then they are going to fill out that SF-424 form and SF lobbying form. Again, you have to fill it out even if there is no lobbying activity. Once you submit those 2 forms, within 48 hours, you're going to get email confirmation that you have registered. And then 24 hours after that, you're going to get an email from grants.gov giving you instructions on how to get into Just Grants and setting up your account there. That is where the bulk of the application is going to be. Now, a lot of the content on this slides is the same as before. It's a little bit more specific, though, to the authorized users. So again, the same person who does the sam.gov account needs to do grants.gov, and they also need to do the Just Grants account. I want to focus a little bit, though, on this Just Grants portion. The person who has created all of these accounts, they are the authorized representative. They need to go into Just Grants, and they need to establish who is going to be able to submit the application. This can be anybody from your organization. They also need to identify 2 people that are going to be the signatories. These people cannot be the person that submits. So in total, you need 3 people involved in this application. For the people who can sign the document, it has to be the CFO or the like, or the superintendent or the like. And then again, once they sign it, the person assigned to submit can go in and do that step. All right, once you get into Just Grants, the first thing they're going to ask you is for some data. So this is just some things to keep in mind. Make sure that your school is collecting. First, they're going to ask you about population information. So are you in a rural, urban, or suburban area? Total population, number of schools in your district, and what's your student enrollment? They're going to ask about existing school security efforts, so emergency management plans and utilize technology. School safety information and incidences that have occurred on campus, and then financial information. So what is your need for federal assistance? And they're going to ask about average spending. All right, so for the COPS grant, there are 2 required documents. There's the project narrative, and in here, you need to give an overview of the current, risk assessment, what are your emergency management plans, and partnerships with local agencies. You're going to go over your funding needs and how you're going to use the grant. What is your strategy for effective project management? And then what is the plan to maintain the project after the life of the grant? And then your second document is going to be the budget narrative. And here you're just going to outline the proposed technology that you plan to use. You're going to give that budget breakdown. You can also include quotes as an appendices to justify your total project cost. All right, so those are the 2 required documents, but now there are several other considerations and things that we would highly recommend that you include in your application. The first thing is going to be, these internal and external partners. So internal partners are going to be the programmatic official, and then there's going to be the financial official. These 2 people must be involved. So when you're doing your project narrative and you're talking about how you're going to implement these projects, they say list up to 3 people. This should be 2 of those spots right here. And then external partners. So getting letters of support or MOUs from law enforcement agencies and other stakeholders, particularly mental health advocates, so a school psychologist, somebody in the student services office, to talk about how the projects can benefit the school climate. Now, for the letters of support, there's a few things you want to make sure that it demonstrates. First, collective action in collaboration with external and internal partners. Demonstrate that the external partners were involved in planning the projects. So when you're deciding what you want to request with this grant, you should do a walkthrough with local law enforcement and have them also reiterate that, yes, these are your security needs. Get them involved from the beginning. And then also demonstrate what the external partner is committed to providing throughout the life of the project. Other things to include in your application that are not necessarily required. Getting a threat vulnerability and risk assessment. If you don't already have an established safety team, I would highly recommend that you do this soon and set up regular meetings and document those meetings. What you can do is, upload those meeting minutes as part of your application. An easy way to do this is to get a transcriber platform. Otter is one of those. Just make sure when you use that you redact any sensitive information before you upload it as part of the application. But ideally, you're going to be able to include at least 6 months of meeting minutes. You want to demonstrate, this was not thrown together last minute, even though you know that the grant reviewer doesn't. So you want to show them we have been carefully planning this. And then, like I said earlier, conduct safety audits. So do walkthroughs with local law enforcement, principals, facility directors. Make sure you're reporting all events to local police. So theft, drug, vandalism, weapon incidences. If you don't report this to law enforcement, maybe you keep some internal documents. You can upload those as well as part of your application if there was something significant that occurred in your jurisdiction. And then lastly, establish and practice drills, so critical incident drills and weather-related drills. All right, so those are ideas of things that you can include in both your SVPP grant application and the STOP application. This is going to be an award highlight for 2024, just to give you an idea of what this year looked like. So for 2024, just over 1,000 applications were submitted, and then just over 200 were awarded. So about 20% of people got the grant. So it is quite competitive. And then average award amounts were $359,718. The last thing I want to point out on this slide is at the very bottom, the demographic information and where the awards went to. So 74% of awards went to schools in rural areas, 18% in suburban, and 8% in urban areas. All right, so when you submit your application, this is the model of scoring. This is the last thing that I want to go over. So here they're going to look at, is the data consistent across your entire application? Is your total project cost the same across all of your documents? Do you have the capacity to make the improvements sought with the grant? So, are you listing 3 individuals who are going to be involved in implementing these projects? Are all of the items allowable? And then can you demonstrate a need for financial assistance? They balance need for financial assistance and demonstrating a need for improved security. The geographic distribution. So again, the majority of awards do go to schools in rural areas, the strength of the written narrative, and then the presence of catastrophic incidences in the jurisdiction. So again, uploading documentation to demonstrate that. And then the use of evidence-based strategies as part of your application. All right, so I have 2 updates to share before we go to questions. This is specific to the nonprofit security grant. There were 2 new codes that were added. They're on the investment justification and on the authorized AEL list. The first is this video analytics code. The description here reads for facial recognition and license plate reader cameras. I have been sitting in on webinars for some different states. Some of those include Illinois and Missouri. they have noted that this code is actually not going to be allowable. So I would confirm with your SIA if you're interested in applying for this, will it be allowed? If not, be careful to avoid the video analytics code. And if you're going to apply for video surveillance, make sure you do the video surveillance code. The second new code, and this one is allowable, is going to be this acoustic sensor code. And this is for weapons detection systems. All right, so with that, I know that was a lot of information, but we do have resource guides available just to reiterate some of this content. But with that, I want to open it up to, if anybody has any questions that I can answer.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Isabel. Let's switch back to the non-screen sharing. How do we do that?
You want me to stop sharing my screen?
If you wouldn't mind. No, it's interesting. On that last slide regarding the video analytics, and it included facial recognition, a license plate, but then the other one was acoustic weapons detection. Does the video analytic one include firearm detection or weapons detection for the video analytic section, or is it only facial and license plate?
You are allowed to do the weapons detection system, yes. They're just very particular about not identifying people's faces and license plates.
Got it. You know what's awesome, and to our participants, as you're going through, so I happen to have a copy of the Path to Safer Schools. And just as you said, like starting with a safety team and documenting that now, that's a critical thing. And then assessing your vulnerabilities. And then you move to funding, right? Because you can't receive funding unless you have a safety team, understand your threats, vulnerabilities, have those identified. That's where funding comes from. And I think all too often, I think, folks think that you can go right to the funding instead of going through that process. But having a safety team is critical. And I love the recommendation of having, transcribing the events. If you do Zoom meetings, you could automatically transcribe those meetings, and at least you're documenting that. So that's very, very helpful. We do have quite a few questions here. So the NSGP, the nonprofit, would that cover private schools as well, or does it have to be religious-based organizations?
They do not have to be religious-based organizations, and we have worked with several private schools, and they have been successful in their application. They just need to have that 501c3 status with the IRS.
I'm going to add one piece to that. The NSGP, it is a federal program, but the states are actually the primary applicants. The sub-applicants are the schools, the churches, and each state gets a different amount of money depending on the demand in that particular area. There's two streams of funding. There's the state stream of funding and then the urban area stream. So obviously, the urban area is going to get a different amount than the rest of the state. And so they do that because this is a very competitive grant. In some areas like New York, we've seen just our own experience over the years. If you aren't a religious institution, or if you're a school that does not have a particular religious affiliation, the likelihood of you getting that or getting chosen for that grant sort of goes down if it's very competitive. And so we've applied for some very vulnerable schools. Let's just use the example in New York, like in the South Bronx, where there were in fact fatalities in and around that school with their student body and their population. And they did not get the award, we believe, because they didn't have a religious affiliation. However, in the state of Hawaii, there was a school that we were working with. It was a charter school. They were in fact nonprofit, absolutely no religious affiliation. And they won in that same fiscal year multiple grants. So it does depend on how competitive your state is, because they have to make the cutoff somewhere, right? And, if there's any rule changes for that particular year or for your particular state.
And I just want to remind folks, if you have a question, please hit the Q&A button. Dr. Solis has a question from Texas. She's in Texas. Can a regional center that serves 48 districts, mostly rural, apply? So can a regional center apply? Does it have to be done on a district-wide basis? and or a school by school basis? Some guidance there.
Yeah, so it needs to be district-wide is how you're going to want to apply. Now, let's just say you have some nonprofit schools or independent schools in your school district. Technically, you are allowed to include them in your application. However, the COPS office, tells people to be wary of doing this. They don't award very many of those type of applications, and they really prioritize the K through 12 schools. So your best chance of success is to only include like your public schools in your district.
Okay, interesting. So it is not, so the maximum 500,000, that is for the entire district.
Exactly, yes.
And is that a 1 year grant? Like, so how does it work? And I know this came up with Elisa in a program last year, but software as a service, does this stuff need to be like, how do you handle annual subscriptions for certain software or even hardware?
So I actually just went through this with somebody else. So you can include, like, let's just say, for example, you're doing video surveillance and there's going to be this annual cost. You are allowed to build it in when you're first purchasing the equipment, but you have to do it at the same time. So when you're buying the equipment in that reimbursement request that you're making to the state, that quote that you give them needs to include any licensing costs in there, whether it's 5 year, 10 year. And I always tell people to just confirm with your SAA that they're going to make sure that this is allowable. I've never run into this issue with anybody. You just have to make sure you buy the hardware and the license at the same time.
Got it. Got it. That's an interesting question here. So does election information, is that part of the narrative? So if a bond or override did not pass, can that justify the need for increased funds from a federal grant? Have you encountered that before? That was interesting.
I haven't. Elisa?
I think that's something you would add to the narrative. They want you to provide, we're talking about SVPP or BJA grants, they want you to provide both a budget narrative and a project narrative. So part of that project narrative is going to be explaining, this is the normal way we do things. This is how we upgrade our security or keep it up to date. And because of some internal issues, whether it's elections or whatever, we are now in need of this money because. So I would use that to your benefit in creating that narrative. You want to explain it and explain it in a way where you're sort of exposing that vulnerability and even tying it into some of the surrounding areas. When we do our TVRAs or our assessments, we talk about surrounding areas. If you're in an area where there are multiple districts, and all the other districts, they don't have the same issues you have, or they have a higher level of security, and your district is really struggling, you are now a prime target comparatively to some of the other districts, right? So if you're having election issues, if you can't move forward with the maintenance of your security system or your overall practice, that's something you want to make sure you include in the narrative.
What's interesting, what guidance would you give to schools that should not apply? You mentioned more rural schools were funded than urban schools. Budgets might be greater in suburban districts. I mean, are there certain factors that you would recommend a school to not even bother applying because they have other resources available?
I think it always could be, worth applying if you are in a urban area. You just really want to make sure that you demonstrate both, again, because so few awards go to those schools, that you have a financial need and there is a security need. So if you've had something in your jurisdiction, make sure you highlight it. Sometimes schools are a little bit hesitant to share that information. But honestly, so many school districts face similar problems. You're not going to be the only one, and it will benefit your application. But again, there's always a chance, and if you don't get it the first time, They actually sometimes will even give you some feedback, and you can even use that to enhance your application in the second year.
I'm going to add one more piece. Again, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we had a record year this year. And because of one of our partners who really champions this whole program for us, they had a large number of applicants in the Illinois area. And which means we had a large number of customers in the Illinois area. We got some feedback from the state of Illinois, from the reps there, that they had a record year. They ran out of money really, really quickly. And there's no doubt that's because, there was such demand and such awareness around this program, both the state program, obviously, and then, of course, our program where we were able to help people apply. We're making a small prediction that in the fiscal year 25, we're going to see Illinois' budget go up. That's what we're anticipating because there was so much demand. So, for the bigger picture, we try and encourage everybody to apply, whether or not they use our services, because the more demand there is, the more, Congress is going to be looking at this when they're allocating their own budgets and stuff like that. And we just keep seeing an increase in these programs and the dollars allocated to these programs. So if you don't ask, you don't get. You might not necessarily win the award the first year, but as Isabel said, you can always apply again the next year, and hopefully the feedback you got and the fact that you are putting in your narrative, in your assessment, in your application, we keep applying because we need this. Hopefully that's going to alert one of the grant reviewers, and they will bump you up on the priority list for the next round.
So interesting point, Elisa. I mean, we've heard in the past, I know Matthew McConaughey, after the Uvalde tragedy, learned that there was $1 billion of funding that was untapped. I mean, are we still in that place? Are all the funds for school safety on a federal level being issued?
I think they're definitely being issued more than they were then. We're starting to see supplemental programs that weren't available in the previous year. We saw Chuck Schumer come out publicly and state, hey, we need more money for houses of worship. So again, it really is because of the need. Number one, there's very few people who are going to argue against the need for school safety. But also number two, because there are more people taking advantage of these programs. That's how the government works. If the money gets used, you get more money next year. If it doesn't get used, obviously they're not going to allocate that budget. So I think it is getting used. And that's why they keep adding more and more opportunities, whether it's an additional supplemental program in that same fiscal year, or even just the state and local grants. We're starting to see more and more state and locals pop up with more funding. There was a year, I think it was possibly 2 years ago, where Pennsylvania was giving away $200,000 per school district, that was a lot of money for a state grant. So I think it's improving. I think it's definitely all getting used. Just my opinion.
No, that's great. And along those lines, and very much aligned with your presentation, Isabel, is and you may have heard that ZeroNow is introducing model legislation for on a state basis, which really follows that path to safer schools, starting with the safety team. Who is your safety coordinator in your district? And it'd be ideal to have a safety director, but if you can't afford one yet, I mean, you probably have somebody that is designated for that, but then assessing your vulnerabilities like we talked about, and from there seeking funding. And hopefully states can allocate more funding, but even on a broader scale, and that's outside this conversation, is establishing sustainable funding, at the district-wide level. How do you reallocate your budget to be able to provide long-term sustainable funding? I mean, grants are amazing, especially for capital projects, to get up to that level, to secure your school on that level. But it's certainly something that we are going to be working on. We're running out of time here, but before we do, a couple things here. Those in the ZeroNow community know that every month, we started this a couple months ago, we pick a topic that we zero in on. We're going to actually revisit grant funding and funding sources in March of 2025. In January, we're zeroing in on transportation safety, school buses. We look at all these different aspects of safety, but looking at transportation safety, and we'll be discussing that as a community. But we will come back and revisit funding now that we've given everyone a head start. We're thinking ahead, get those safety committee meetings going now, start documenting those, getting ahead of the whole process. So when the grant applications do open up in the spring, you'll all be ready. But before we wrap it up, just final words of wisdom, thoughts to share with the group. Isabel, we'll start with you. Any final thoughts for our participants?
Like I said in the presentation, I think the best way to have a successful application or increase your chances is to start now. It seems like, again, spring is so far away, it's going to come much sooner than you think. The earlier you start preparing, the grant reviewers, they can tell what was thrown together quickly and what was planned. So that, I think, is going to be, one of your best chances.
Elisa, before do you have your final thought as you formulate that? Meredith, we have a bunch of questions that came in that we did not get a chance to answer here. But after this, give us about 15 minutes. If you move back to the ZeroNow community, we'll post these questions in the community so Elisa and Isabel can respond to them. And then this video recording will be available in the community within a week from now. So I know some folks asked for a copy of the presentation. This whole video will be available there. But Elisa, final words of wisdom for our participants.
Yeah, well, I agree with Isabel. You cannot start early enough. This is a huge undertaking. People sort of underestimate how much work goes into it. But the only other thing I'll add to it is really create your own little community in terms of getting more resources, one or two other folks in your organization to help you with the paperwork and help you do some research and write some of the documents, proofread some of the documents. It's critical. So, find somebody to help you navigate all of this. There's plenty of professional resources, but if you want to reach out within your own organization, I'm sure you can find somebody to partner up with and tackle the project.
Awesome. Thank you both. Yeah, this was a special presentation that hopefully will give folks some good insights. I know I learned a lot today, so this is wonderful. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year. So take care.